Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas on Saturday, January the 3rd. And welcome to our commentary. Well, everybody's talking about Venezuela today, and we're going to get into that, as well as some of the ramifications, frankly, some of the ramifications for what could happen in the region. I mean, there's a lot of other countries that could potentially be impacted by this. But before we get to Venezuela and some of my thoughts about this, it's an ongoing story, by the way. A lot of things are going to happen. So we don't mean to suggest that this is the end of it. It's the beginning of I think, a larger story here. But before we get to Venezuela, I just want to remind you that I have a post over at the American Thinker today where I'm talking about Mayor Mandani. He is the mayor now of New York City. And I'm talking a little bit about that speech that he gave to the inauguration speech, where he praised collectivism and the wonders of collectivisms. And, the era of big government is back, I guess that's what he meant to say. At another part of the speech, he also beat up some of the people who I guess are not paying enough taxes, the rich who are not paying their fair share. Not exactly sure who he's talking about, but nevertheless, he talked about it. And, I think that, as I mentioned in my post, that this is going to be a problem for the Democrats, because every Democrat is going to have to answer for this guy. And they can't just hide behind the curtain and say, well, he's from another city, he's from another district, and just because he said that doesn't mean that I have to believe it. No, you're going to have to explain it. You're going to have to somehow at least say whether you support it or don't support it. So he is going to become a nightmare, I believe, for the Democrats. Now, one thing going for him is that he's very telegenic, and he does a good job on, when he goes to the media. So that works for him. And frankly, he is popular back home where he won. But I think the longer that his term goes, and the more that people begin to realize that what he's talking about is complete nonsense, and that if you want to deal with affordability, you don't do it by beating up the people who pay taxes or the people who invest in your city. I also think a lot of those people are going to leave. Many of them already have, actually. So I think it's just going to be a fascinating story to watch. This Mayor Mandami, he is going to have an impact on the Democrat Party. And I don't think it's going to be a good impact. The places where he will succeed or become very popular are already heavily Democrat. And the challenge of the Democrat Party is to go after those areas where they're not winning, and they're not going to do it with Mayor Mandami. So, interesting situation brewing in New York City. We'll see how it goes. Well, let's talk about Venezuela. Like many of you, woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning today, and as I always do, I check on my iPhone to see what the big story of the day is. And the big story was, of course, that we went in, arrested Maduro, and he's on his way to New York. Quite a story, to say the least. I had a feeling something like this could happen, but at the same time, I had no idea that it would happen today or last night. But I think overall, I support what the president did. I think this man had to be removed. He stole an election. He's also a fugitive of the law. He was indicted in New York district up there. And, I think it's only fair that he go to that district where he was indicted and face the consequences. So I think it was a good move on the president's part. What I was caught by surprise, frankly, was what the president said during the press conference when he said that we were now going to be running Venezuela. I was surprised to hear that. What I thought would happen was that we would have a very quick transition, maybe a few days, and put in the presidency the man who won the election, Mr. Gonzalez. He won the election. And so why not put him in the presidency where he should be? That's what I thought we would do. But no, President Trump said that we're going to be running the oil fields. I guess we're going to be running the oil business. Now, that's not the end of the world, because they need help very badly in that particular industry, and that's a cash cow for Venezuela. So they need help there. But the other part about who's going to be running the country, that's where I was a little bit surprised, to say the least, that President Trump would say what he said about that we are going to be running the country. Now, in all fairness to President Trump, there is time to explain what he said, and I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and wait for a more complete explanation of what exactly that means. My guess is that Secretary of State Rubio is going to be very heavily involved in that particular transaction about who's running Venezuela and what exactly happens there. I think he is going to be the face of whatever happens in Venezuela. So let's give Secretary Rubio and President Trump an opportunity to get more specific as to what they mean by who's going to be running Venezuela. I think if you just hear the president today, you have a right to feel like, wait a minute, we're going to be running Venezuela? That's a pretty heavy task. But let's give them a chance. Let's see exactly what they mean. If they're talking about the United States getting very involved in the oil production and basically bringing back the oil fields, because that's an industry that has been devastated by the Maduro and Chavez regime. If that's what they're talking about, I think that's actually good. And that's good for Venezuela because that's where the cash is going to come from. That's where the money is going to come from to rebuild the country. It's going to come from those oil fields. So if we can make it easier for them to pump and get more oil out of the ground and just make it easier for them to do that, I think that's a good idea. But running the country is a little bit more ambitious. So I would like to see more specific details of what that means. But I do support the operation to remove Maduro. And, you got to think about what the U.S. military has done here in less than 1 year. We had that operation against Iran where we literally destroyed the nuclear facility. And now we have this absolutely incredible operation where we go in Venezuela, go in Caracas, we arrest the president and the first lady, get them out of the country, no casualties. To the best of my knowledge, there wasn't really much fighting that took place. And that was another thing that surprised me a little bit. I thought that Maduro's army, frankly, would fight a little bit more. I mean, I thought that they would at least put up a fight to defend their president. So that I was surprised. That was a little bit surprised. So maybe the army wasn't so much in favor of Maduro anyway. One of the things, I just saw this in the news before I started the video. One of the things I've heard is that the vice president of Venezuela, this lady Rodriguez, has apparently fled to Russia. So it looks like she's not going to be a part of the transition. And that might be a good thing because she was, after all, Maduro's vice president. So how can you, on one hand, say we don't expect, we don't respect or we don't recognize the government of Maduro because he stole the elections, and then on the other hand say we want the vice president of that stolen election to now be the vice president. So I think it's probably a good thing that she fled, and that opens up, I think, the possibility for somebody else. Hopefully, as I said a minute ago, I'm hoping that person who takes over the country is Mr. Gonzalez. He is very pro-American, and I think he would work very well with whatever plans Trump has for the country. I think one of the big questions, of course, is what does the whole mean? What does it mean for Cuba? What does it mean for Colombia? What does it mean for Mexico? What does it mean for the region? Well, in terms of Cuba, I think we know what it means. It means that Cuba has lost really its last big ally. The Cuban regime has been basically subsidized throughout the 60 years or so that they've been in power. They've always had somebody subsidizing them. First, the Soviet Union, more recently here, Venezuela. And without that subsidy, the country cannot exist. It doesn't have the ability to support itself. So this is a real problem for Cuba. They could be collapsing soon. They simply don't have the dollars. They don't have the energy. They don't have the oil. They don't have anything. So that government is in deep trouble. Colombia is another government that could be in trouble. But I think unless something dramatic happens, I think Trump will wait until the next elections. And the elections are supposed to be next year, or this year, actually, later this year. And all indications are that a man from the right is going to win that election. So Colombia will join the pro-American tendency of so many of these other countries. And Mexico is that's a more interesting case, because Mexico has been working with the U.S. A little bit better, from what I understand. But Mexico still has these cartel problems, and I heard President Trump say today that Mexico is still a problem, and Mexico is a problem. So we'll see how all of this impacts Cuba, Mexico, Colombia. As far as the region, I think the message is clear, that the United States is going to exercise power and defend its interests. And I think that will be welcomed, my guess, by most of the countries in the region, at least in practical terms. They will welcome that. So a fascinating day for Trump's foreign policy. And I will say this, this is an incredible coincidence. We always like to close the program with On This Day in History. Well, on this day in history, actually, not this day specifically, but this whole week, it was about a 2-week period that the United States went into Panama to arrest and take out Noriega, who was also indicted for being a narco terrorist. Now, that operation was a lot bigger, because that operation took a lot more soldiers than this particular operation did. Of course, it was in Panama, where we already had the soldiers. So it was a much more complicated operation, successful, but more complicated than this one in Venezuela. But I think it's kind of a coincidence that 37 years later, in 2026, we take out the leader of Venezuela associated with the narcos on the 37th anniversary that we took out Noriega, who we indicted, and especially he spent a lot of time in jail before he passed away a few years ago. So we're going to be talking a lot more about this story, because there's a lot more coming. I think we need to know more about exactly how the U.S. is going to be running Mexico. We know the vice president of Venezuela is not going to be a part of, not Mexico, but Venezuela, running Venezuela, I meant to say. So we know that the vice president of Venezuela is not going to be a part of it, because I just read she fled the country. So somebody else will have to do the job. But I think it's a good day for the people of Venezuela. Hopefully they can get their country back. It's a lovely country. The people are absolutely great. Great people. I've had the great opportunity to know many of them over the years. It was once a middle-class, prosperous country. And much like Cuba, it was destroyed by the socialists and the communists, as they always do. Everything they touch, they destroy. So we'll be talking a lot more about Venezuela and what happened over the next few days. Thank you for listening. Have a wonderful day. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas.